Okay, good evening for all of my students of the higher management specialization. Let me record this short video for you to help in the process of our reading for the understanding of business requirements. The key point that I want to stress out in this material is how to build the architecture for the design of a business process. So the pivot point that we want to emphasize is basically the central command board for the designing of a business, where we have on one side, on our left-hand side, we have customers and we have users on the other side. So the goal is bridging the gap between what users want, what users need, and business requirements. What requirements and what are the business goals and the business needs that are necessary for the business to succeed. It is important also to keep in mind how the architecture is being built. What we want to say by that is the business design coordination. The business design coordination is a process where we have different aspects of the business that need to be taken care of. What is our business environment? What are our businesses? Is our business effective? Is well organized? Do our people get in the way of our chance or change hinder improvement? What business information do we need and use? What kind of technology promote change and improvement? So what are the issues that need to be considered before we put together the coordination of a business process? It's also important to say that we need, in the process of building a service, we need to have what they call the service design unit. In other words, there needs to be one person that has to be responsible and accountable for the process of the service. And also, they need to put together a business statement or a service statement at the end of the process. If we go back to the architecture, it is also important to mention the service constellation. The service constellation that we see on the right lower side of the screen is basically a map or a road map that needs to be well laid out in a way that we can graphically observe how the gap is going to be bridged. In other words, we see in this graph as an example of the subway station or the underground London subway stations in England. It's a good example to say how to bridge the gap between business requirements, business goals, business needs, business strategies and tactics are put together to serve the psychological needs and the material needs of the user. So those two things do not intuitively come together. You know, the business has to bring those two things together. That's what the article or the chapter of this book is stressing out, the importance, emphasizing the importance of bridging the gap between the user's needs, their psychological needs, or the business needs and the business requirements. If we see the inner gray ring inside, we see all of the needs that have to be considered by the user, the person that ultimately is going to be served. And there are different types of people that will demand different types of service. In other words, if we want to reach from point A to point B, we have different ways to access and different ways to fulfill our promise. To engage in the service that we want to to please, to serve. Saying that and going back to the business architecture, that is basically the central point or the pivot point of this chapter, it is important to say how to bridge the gap. And basically, the gap will start being bridged by the difference between what the stakeholder wants and what the user wants. If we say the stakeholder wants to reduce costs and overheads and improve self-service and improve travel experience and redeployment, that's what the stakeholder basically wants. What about the user? What about the end user? They want fewer mistakes, they want user-friendly, they want fully trained people, and ultimately they want a service to be improved. That's basically the graph. This graph is explaining to us how to bridge the gap between service requirements and perspectives and user needs. And that brings us to the last point of the business architecture that this chapter is laying out right here. And this is talking about the roadmap for service requirements. And the roadmap for service requirements is ultimately talking about the business rules and requirements, the operating model that we're going to use, and also taking into consideration all the time the strategy of the business or the enterprise. Where is the business going? And the user requirements. What are the user requirements? What do they need? What are the different segments? What are the different ultimate needs that need to be pleased? We have different system requirements. We have functional requirements, external requirements, and constraints. Okay? And that is ultimately to say about the specification and the contrast between what the user wants and what the business wants. So those two things have to come together. Okay, so this short video is intended to promote and to help and motivate the reading that you are doing about the chapter of the book, of the second chapter of the book called Collaborative Business Design. Okay, what is covered in this chapter is about service requirements. They talk about the gap between business and IT delivery, introducing business design as an approach to bridge the business IT gap in understanding, and gathering the right requirements for business needs. Thank you.